I want to explain why I voted no on the infrastructure bill. The infrastructure bill will cost American taxpayers about $1.2 trillion, $550 billion in new spending. It was put together by a handful of Republican and Democratic senators in private. There were no public hearings. The bill's 2,700 pages long. It's twice as long as the Bible. We were given only a few days to read it. If you talk to senators privately, 99 out of 100 will tell you they haven't read it and the other one's lying. This is not an infrastructure bill. It's an infrastructure, Green New Deal, and welfare bill. I define infrastructure, I think like most people, roads, bridges, ports, and the like. According to the Wall Street Journal, and according to my math, only 23% of the new spending in this bill is for infrastructure. I voted no on this bill because we were told that the bill would be paid for, and that's just not accurate. According to the Congressional Budget Office, which is nonpartisan, only about half of the bill is paid for. The rest of the money we have to borrow, about $256 billion. $256 billion is more than the entire gross domestic product of Louisiana. And some folks, like the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, say we're going to have to borrow $400 billion. I voted against the bill because we were told that the bill would not raise taxes, and that's not accurate. I'll say more on that in a moment. It's been said that Louisiana will receive $6 billion in new money from this bill for infrastructure. That's not accurate. We would have received $4.8 billion anyway from the Federal Highway Trust Fund, which is funded from federal gasoline taxes. In other words, of the $6 billion, we would have received $4.8 billion anyway, whether the bill passed or not. More accurately, Louisiana is only going to receive about $1.1 billion in new money over 10 years. That's about $110 million a year. Normally, from the Federal Highway Trust Fund, we receive about $750 million every year. So if we're going to get $110 million extra, that's about 15% extra we're going to get from the bill. Now, that money, this extra money that we're getting, is coming from new taxes on Louisiana businesses. This bill raises $14.5 billion in new taxes over 10 years on petrochemical manufacturers, of which there are many, beaucoup, in Louisiana. Louisiana petrochemical manufacturers are going to pay an estimated $1.3 billion in new taxes over 10 years, or about $130 million a year. That's second only to Texas. So, Louisiana, under this bill, is going to receive $110 million a year in new road money, but we're going to get to pay for it with roughly $130 billion in new taxes on Louisiana businesses, which make up a good part of our economy. Louisiana's losing money on this deal. That's why I voted against it. I also voted against this bill because the infrastructure bill and the second bill right behind it, the reconciliation bill you've heard about, or as I call it, the $5.5 trillion tax and spending binge bill, are joined at the hip. These two bills are married. They're inextricably linked, and if you think otherwise, you've been smoking dope. President Biden, Senator Schumer, Speaker Pelosi have all said we're not going to have one bill without the other, and everybody knows that. Now, the proponents of the infrastructure bill say that the infrastructure bill makes it harder to pass the tax and spending binge bill. Well, if that's the case, why is every single Democrat in the Senate supporting the infrastructure bill? I voted against the infrastructure bill because it is chock full of non-infrastructure spending on what, in my opinion, is stupid stuff. Here's some examples. Under this bill, Senator Schumer gets $12 billion for a new tunnel in New York, his Gateway Tunnel project. That's 10 times more than the new money Louisiana is going to get for infrastructure. Now, Senator Schumer's pet project does not deserve 10 times more money than Louisiana's roads and bridges. I voted against this bill because it gives $66 million in new subsidies for passenger rail and Amtrak. Another Schumer favorite, by the way, despite the fact that we've already given mass transit $70 billion in prior COVID bills. I voted against this bill because it spends $810 million, almost $1 billion, to encourage people to recycle. Now, I support recycling, but I'm not going to spend $1 billion to tell people to do it. I voted against this bill because it spends $7.5 billion to construct electric vehicle charging stations across America, even though only 3% of new car sales each year are electric vehicles, and most of those are in California. I voted against this bill because it spends $40 billion on big city mass transit systems, like buses. Fine, I support buses. But we've already given these big city mass transit systems about $65 billion extra in prior COVID bills. And I'm afraid all this new money we're giving is going to be used to bail out underwater pension systems in other states. I voted against the infrastructure bill because it spends $14 billion on a new welfare program for internet service. And quite frankly, most of that money is going to end up in the pocket of AT&T and other large internet service providers. I voted against the infrastructure bill because it includes a directive to the Department of Transportation to mandate alcohol detection systems in all cars within 3 years. Now, think about what that's going to do to the price of a car in America. I voted against the infrastructure bill because it gives $73 billion to apply the Green New Deal to our electricity grids. The proponents of this bill want all states to become like California, which has the highest electricity costs in the Western Hemisphere, certainly in America. I voted against this bill because Biden officials are going to get to give out almost all of the bill's non-infrastructure money as grants. That means that the Biden administration has almost unfettered discretion. The Biden administration is going to get to pick winners and losers in this bill, and that's just a natural fact. And frankly, that alone tells you all you need to know about this deal. I voted against this bill because it, for one of the first times ever, if not the first, recognizes transgender as a protected class, like race or religion or gender. I don't know what that has to do with an infrastructure bill. I voted against this bill because it mandates a pilot program. Now listen to this. It mandates a pilot program for a national tax on vehicle miles traveled. In other words, it's a pilot program to test taxes on the amount of miles that people travel every year, amount of miles they drive their cars. And that's going to really hit rural America hard. I voted against this bill because it cuts Medicare by $9 billion. It just does. That's one of the ways they're claiming to help pay for this bill. Now, you have to keep in mind that this infrastructure bill, as bad as I think it is, it has to pass the House. And it's going to get amended by Speaker Pelosi. And I think it's going to get a lot worse. I also voted against the infrastructure bill because there's no disaster aid for Southwest Louisiana in it. I tried, but I couldn't convince the Senate. I also voted against this bill because, in my opinion, it's an inflation bomb. It's going to raise Louisiana prices at the gas pump and at the grocery store, and that's a tax. That's all there is to it. Inflation is a tax. It hits working people the hardest. I voted against this bill because there was no effort made, none, zero, zilch, nada. There was no effort made to try to scrub the budget in order to pay for this bill. So, to sum up, the proponents of this bill say that it shows that Washington can work. No, it doesn't. It just shows you that Washington can spend money. Any fool can spend money. I voted against this bill because I think it shortchanges Louisiana and America. We cannot afford infrastructure at any cost. I support infrastructure, but I'm not going to support it. I can't support it. It's your tax dollars, no matter what, at any cost. This is not an infrastructure bill, folks. If you look up epic binge in the dictionary, you'll see a picture of this bill. It contains new taxes, and we're still going to have to borrow money to pay for the bill. It almost feels lazy to call this bill wasteful. It's a lot worse. It's just a further descent into debt that we're leaving for our children and our grandchildren. And that's why I voted no.